Committee, we're going to get started. We have Mr. Weezer here, myself, Bernard Parks is here. We're expecting Mr. Corretz. Let me go through the agenda. If we can have a consent item number 10. Also, we have a request to continue number 7 and 12, contemplating that they'll hear that in public safety in the near future. So if we can have those two items, and then we'll go to closed session on items 1, 2, and 3, and then come back to the full agenda.
All right.
It's just us, Mohican.
Okay. We're back in session with the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee. We have a quorum, Mr. Corretz, Mr. Weezer, myself, Bernard Parks. Let me ask that we move item 3. We've discussed it in closed session, but we move item 3, approve the city attorney's recommendations on the funding allocations. Also, Mr. Corretz, we moved item 10 on consent before your arrival. If you concur with that, we'll move item 10 on consent.
And for item 3, this for public disclosure, basically the request was for a little over $2 million for the outside counsel. The UB included $3.75 million, so it roughly leaves the 1.7 remaining.
Very good. And then we have a request to go to item 6 first, and I'd like to do item 4 last.
Okay, item number 6 is Los Angeles Convention Center and CO reports in response to motion Perry Hahn relative to flexible demand-based pricing for the Los Angeles Convention Center.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Mary Jane Aquino with the Los Angeles Convention Center, and we are here to discuss, or rather to report on the status of the flexible demand-based pricing. A group composed of members from, or representatives from the Convention Center, the CLA, the CAO, the city attorney, and the LA Inc. has met over the course of many months to discuss the various criteria that will be used in the practical implementation of flexible demand-based pricing. And I think that we have come to the point wherein we are requesting that the implementation be approved by this committee, and that we would like to be able to go forward with the flexible pricing.
Okay.
Just real quick, John Wickham with the CLA's office. The TCT Committee, Trade, Commerce, and Tourism Committee, heard this last week and adopted a set of recommendations that provide instructions for the city attorney to prepare an ordinance, and some of the criteria that will be in the ordinance, and then that will come back to council if council moves this forward for a final review.
Let me just ask a couple of questions. What are we going to use as criteria to determine if this is a success? Because I understand we're going to be looking at a controller's audit at some time in the future.
Yes, there has been many criteria, or rather there are actually 3 major criteria, and within this criteria will be condition wherein there will be need or application of flexible demand base. The major criteria actually is a cancellation of an event within 12 months.
I mean, that's the criteria to use it. I'm just wondering, what are they going to rate it on to determine?
Yes, there is actually a process, and it will be determined on a case-by-case basis as to the practical applicability of it. But there will be a process wherein internally the conditions, if it's determined that the conditions are being met, that it will go through a process of review and approval, and that it will also be looked at by, as it goes through the process, reviewed by the Director of Sales and Marketing onto the General Manager of the Los Angeles Convention Center, and that there will be documents that will be included in the package as it goes through the process, and that...
Let me just ask, maybe I'm not making myself clear. What I'm thinking about is when we ask the controller to come in and audit in 2 years, what are they going to look at to tell us that this has been successful?
Well,
The concept of having the audit was to make sure that the program, as implemented, was following the guidelines. This is more of a check and balance concept to make sure that once the convention center has an implementation plan in place, the audit is to make sure that the implementation plan is being followed. It's not so much looking at the economic consequences of bringing additional business into the city.
That's what I'm wondering about, is that if the controller looks at it and says they followed A through F,
Yeah.
and we don't know whether it's made additional dollars for the city, isn't that a large part of why we're doing this? Is that what we were told, is that we're at a disadvantage of competing with other convention centers because we don't have this?
Exactly.
And so I'm just wondering, what is it that we're going to ask the controller to look at so that at the end of, because we got a sunset in 3 years.
Yes.
So at the end of 3 years, what do they come back and tell us? They followed A through F, but does that tell us that it was a success, it was mediocre, or what it was?
well,
That's what I'm
it's,
trying to figure out.
yes. Well, each particular event will be, again, looked at in its, at the conditions that was pertaining for that particular event. And usually this will be used for those occasions and events where there is no, when the space itself is vacant, and therefore the flexible demand pricing will actually generate ancillary revenues for one, or it will, at the same time, maybe if they sign for multiple licenses for a 2-year period of time, those are some of the instances wherein it will be used. Therefore, we would rather have revenue rather than none if it was shown that that particular time was actually vacant and the use of flexible demand pricing was successful in actually bringing revenue to that particular time.
Let me ask also, is this a common practice with other convention centers?
Flexibility in the pricing. This is more and more common in convention centers. Anaheim is using it, and
Yes.
we looked at a number of other convention centers across the country in developing this policy, and we're finding that it's being adopted in other locations as well.
Okay. Now, at first, when this was brought up, there was some statement that we thought there were some legal liabilities. Have we overcome those?
Sherry Martin Brown, Assistant City Attorney. The Convention Center staff has provided documentation and data regarding extended periods of vacancy at the Convention Center during periods of time that historically have not experienced such low vacancy rates. They've also offered a lot of comparative data on the practices at other convention centers and the incentives that they are offering to their potential licensees. And particularly, they've focused on our chief competitors, Anaheim, Las Vegas. And so, in addition to that and other information that they've provided, and the ability of this working group comprised of the CAO's office, the CLA, city attorney, and convention center staff, we have crafted a framework that the city attorney's office feels would be a legally defensible, flexible pricing scheme. And so
We don't want to use the word scheme.
Well, yes, let me rephrase that. A flexible pricing program.
Thank you. Okay.
And the key words being legally defensible. So which is not to say that there won't be perhaps some parties out there who have a complaint or challenge our program.
Okay.
But I think that the framework that has been developed by this very hardworking group will certainly benefit our marketing team at the convention center and enable them to sell space there a lot easier.
Let me ask, on the May 5th report, by the CAO, which one of the A through D options were selected? They gave 4 different options as it relates to charging variable rates.
I think we've really changed all that around. Those options have been reworked and...
Okay, so these are not the authority, it's, you come up with something different?
Yes, 3 new criteria. Basically, cancellation of an event for significant reduction in the space previously contracted for an event, or vacancy in excess of historical average, say within a 2-year period, licensing period. And the third criteria would be consideration of ancillary revenue generated by an event. And when we say ancillary revenue, we're referring to food and beverage sales, parking revenue, those sorts of things that can really add up to be a lot of dollars, a big amount. And generally, those are the 3 considerations.
All right. And then let me ask, on the recommendations that came out of the Trade and Commerce Committee, they mention on D as to a 3-year sunset, and they talk about the controller doing a financial audit to evaluate the effectiveness. How does that work? Are we talking about the audit is within the 3-year period? Is the audit start at the 3rd year of conclusion? Does it just stop and then we audit without anything, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been pondering that. Is it something that starts at 2.5 years so that at the end of 3 years, the council can consider fully whether to move this forward? And I think that would probably be the best way to move that forward, so that the audit begins prior to the full conclusion of the program, so that there's not a gap if it looks like this is an effective program.
Okay.
No, I don't have any further questions. This seems like something that would just make a lot of sense to me when you have vacancies and you can fill them by having a flexible lower rate. I think it's something we should be doing. So I'm excited that we're moving forward with this.
And then let me just comment. We will move the recommendations. I guess, first of all, we'll note and file the CAO reports May 5th and November 2nd, and we'll approve the motion, Harry and Han, as amended with those criteria. I would just like to add just a couple of directions. One, in reference to D and E, that we direct that the controller audit be done prior to the 3-year sunset, so that we'll have the results of that audit well in advance of this program coming to conclusion. And also, that is part of, and let's see, the second one would be as part of the controller's audit, that we ask the controller to identify specifically the criteria that will be identified as to the success of the program, so that in the financial impact that this program has had. So we'd ask that those 2 items be added to the criteria for the audit.
Councilmember Diana Mangio, Office of the CAO. Could we also make one more amendment to instruction number 2 to basically state that that the implementation, that the Convention Center, CAO, and CLA, with the assistance of the city attorney, work on developing the implementation policy once it's put forward, or
Now go over that's number 2 where it says,
as part of the process. Sorry.
where we say
Number
instruct them
2
to prepare implementation policy.
includes CAO, CLA, and then also with the assistance of the city attorney.
Okay, we'll add that. So we'll move approve the Perry Han motion as amended with the direction as given by the committee, and with the additions and amendment to item 2 on their motion. So we'll move that item.
Thank you very much.
Well, let me ask the Convention Center, or the CAO too, where is the item that deals with the incentive program? Is that in the mix?
The incentive pay?
Incentive pay.
Yeah, that's not part of this council file.
Yeah, I
we're
just
still,
wondered, where is that in the process?
we've had conversations with the convention center on trying to get an implementation. We're still working on some of the details.
I mean, are we like months, weeks, or decades away?
Good question. Well, it depends on we can get on the same page.
Okay, all right, so if we can ask that the convention and the CAO get together, because I think that came out during the budget process, that was a very important item to the convention center, to see if we can't resolve that issue.
Yes, actually, the flexible demand-based pricing is part of this, one of the items that the convention center has identified as ways for us to mitigate the current economic conditions, and we will work with the CAO and other agencies to address the resolution of the incentive pay for sales and marketing, of which our director is here to represent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, this should take us to item 5, which is the CLA report relative to special events. This is the standard plan report for farmers markets and block parties.
Mr. Chairman, Paul Smith from the CLA. As you recall, Mr. Chairman, the council recently adopted a special events procedure and subsidy ordinance. During some of those discussions, this committee directed my office to develop a standard plan to reduce the costs associated with farmers markets and block parties. You asked us to work with Building and Safety, Bureau of Street Services, Bureau of Sanitation, LAPD, and the Fire Department. Also, in early September, there was a motion introduced by Mr. Weezer. It also directed us in the Bureau of Street Services to report back on 3 items. One of them was to develop a list of certified markets within the Los Angeles city limits, which utilize the right-of-way. There are about 17 of those. Also report on the feasibility of using an annual permit process, and that has been accepted because it was part of the ordinance, and those are part of the standard plans. Also, there was also a request to look at block parties, farmers markets to be treated as block parties, and essentially because of the way the departments have worked on the permit costs and the salary costs, they will be treated in essence like a block party. The CLA and the other departments, we met on a number of occasions to come up with a plan, a cost reduction plan that did not affect public safety, to reduce and mitigate the costs associated with those events. Our report really is focused on 2 things: reduction of costs for both farmers markets and block parties to a de minimis level. And for the most part, I think we've achieved that goal. One other thing of note, the departments have, on the inspection end, have agreed to work together to keep an eye on both of these events, so we don't duplicate inspections. If one inspector saw something, he would notify another inspector, so there could be a quick response to whatever may be a violation or a concern. So that's somewhat unique in the city. We also put together a schedule that illustrated the costs associated with both farmers markets and block parties. We come up with, for farmers markets, we actually essentially came up with 2 numbers. The annual permit would be in a range of $800 if there were no canopies or tents. And when I say canopies or tents, I'm saying something that is beyond just the pop-up tents you see. They're like 450 square feet or larger. If it had tents or something larger than the 450 square feet, then it would be around $1,400. for an annual fee. As you recall, we waived weekly fees for these events, which in the aggregate could be $25,000 a year if we actually had collected those dollars. So this is a significant reduction in the fiscal impact on the operation of those events. Now, there's some caveats here. First of all, the layout of the event would have to remain the same over the year. If you change it, then you probably have another. They would pick up and return whatever barriers they had to utilize. Initially, we thought they were going to post their own signs, the permanent parking restriction signs. And like I said before, the tents are below the 450 square feet. Mr. Fisher from the Department of Transportation now tells me that because the way the regulatory setup and the need to have permanent signs done in a certain manner, their department is suggesting that they do the installation of the permanent notices for a farmer's market. They have prepared a signage drawings for distribution. We initially thought that a sponsor could, using the specifications developed by the department, could install their own permanent signs. That does not seem to be practical or feasible at this particular time. That cost will be between, correct me if I'm wrong, John, between $500 and $2,000. But that would be a one-time cost, annualized over a number of years. A farmer's market would be at that location. So that's something new in this in our calculations. Block parties, we also have prepared a schedule on what the costs associated to those. As you know, block parties are exempt from the 50% clause, and so whatever city costs would be passed back to the council offices to utilize their subsidy accounts.
Let me ask you, there's been some confusion on that. Does that require the block party people to ask for that reimbursement, or is it done automatically?
On the process, I think that is between BOSS, who is the Bureau of Street Services, is the entity that's responsible for collecting all these costs. On a procedural, whether the block party sponsors would come back, I think the block party's sponsors would come back to the council office and make that request.
Up front.
Yeah. There is, our friends at the city clerk's office do have a process in place and guidelines to assist those entities in making those requests. We can circulate the guidelines and the forms. Also, in talking to our friends at Building and Safety, they are now saying that we had indicated that would be a permit fee of about $275. They're saying not so much, because they think that their role in block parties is de minimis. They don't think that's necessary. There was some initial talk about if they had canopies or tents or something, there may be. So that's been backed out, that $275,000. So it's like $310 if you have no tents, and $600 if you have some kind of a tent that you need for assemblage purposes. So those costs are derived from a lot of hours of folks getting together and seeing how they could reduce these things. A lot of conversations, and frankly, still a lot of work to do to get the communication's the hard part. How do we get what we've decided here drifting down to the folks that need to be implementing this? And that's one of the things that a challenge we need to work harder on. That's in essence where we are right now. Those costs are de minimis. The process is under scrutiny, in terms of making it more efficient, more effective. I know that the personnel from BOSS and LAPD and a number of places, departments, have met with sponsors, met with council offices, and there's a lot of discussion how this process will roll out in a timely and efficient process. Those will continue, and this is different, and there are going to be some kinks, and there are going to be some places where we're going to have to regroup, but we're challenged to do the task to do this, and we're going to make it work.
And this is the last installment on that ordinance, is this piece of it. Everything else is now in place, the one-stop center, the funds, and all that other.
Well, Mr. Gary Harris from BOS can tell you, boss, can tell you where they are. I think they are. I think they're well established to do this right now. There may be some future endeavors to make it more electronic, to make it more efficient. May come back on those matters. But the process right now is one of hammering down the communication amongst all of us, how we're going to do this. There is sufficient disinformation out there about how it works that the folks that are involved with this are on the phone a lot, trying to pull in the reins, move things around, so that there is an honest interpretation, straightforward interpretation of what needs to be done. And it's going to take some time to get everybody, because we have maybe 2,000 special events a year in the city. There's a lot of folks involved, a lot of people who have been doing it a certain way for a long time, and now we have a different way.
But I think one of the things that you said, the ordinance is fairly clear on a lot of issues, but we found that the rumor mill has superseded the ordinance because people.
Yeah, it's like when you tell a story and you tell it to someone else and tell it to someone else. By the time it gets to the guy who has to meet with the event sponsor, it may not be exactly accurate. And I think we're going to try to do more information pieces. Definitely meet with all the folks that are involved. Try to get a better sense of what their problems are, what the questions they have, so then we can direct it in a more efficient and effective way.
You know, one thing I think that's going to be very important, that we have some clarity as to what the responsibility of the organizer of the event, because if they're going to have a permanent location and that they basically know they're committed to that, that they know what the requirements are in the sense of if they're going to have without tents or without these things that require extra parts to it. These are all things that are very important that people can't change in midstream. And the same thing on block parties, that if they're going to pick up their stuff and bring their insurance policy and things of that nature, they have to understand the significance of being consistent so that there's no misinterpretation.
I couldn't say it any better. Those are the kind of things that people are tripping on. I know BOSS is working very hard to put this together. They are the central point. If we just take a quick second here and go, excuse me, event sponsors are to go to the Bureau of Street Services. There they go to their website, they fill out an application. That application then is sent to council offices and to the affected departments. Affected departments put together a cost schedule that goes back to BOSS. Council offices are to respond back to their concerns, any mitigations they want to impose on the event. They get their response back. They are not approving it. They're not in that kind of mode, but they are communicating back to BOSS about how they feel about how that particular event may operate better and the community impacts that are associated with it. Once all that information is pulled together by BOSS, they get, in one other sideline here, to get more complicated, let's say it goes to DOT. DOT may have to have a conversation with the event sponsor to clarify what they had on their application. But that communication is from DOT to the event sponsor. They don't have to go around and asking where DOT will contact them. But when all that information comes back, DOT then gets with the event sponsor, asks for the the permit fee money up front. The event takes place, inspections take place where, as scheduled. The event concludes. The Bureau then takes time to collect all the actual costs from the departments, because by ordinance, they're asked to track all those costs. They have to have a tabulation of costs. At the end of the day, there may be no new costs, and there may be some costs that weren't quite expensive. So there may be a refund, or you ask the event sponsor to do a little bit more. But once that's done, upfront payment, reconciliation, and at the end of the day. That's the general process that we're trying to get people to. And in that, though, it's the need for the services to try to, as you expressed, to get the event sponsors to really look hard at what they're asking the city to provide. Our costs are not necessarily cheap, but the departments have worked hard to make those costs realistic. So the costs we have now, I think, is this has been a successful endeavor to try to pull these costs into the realm of reasonableness, both for farmers markets and for block parties.
Yeah, do we have a sense of how much it will cost the farmers markets organizers to put up permanent signage and to hire a professional traffic engineer?
Yeah, I think we do, and John Fisher from the department can.
Yes, what we have on our standard plan here, Councilman Weezer, spells out exactly what the sponsor would do versus what DOT would do. And the sponsor would be in charge of anything that's movable, the barricades, the signs on the barricades, and the cones, installing them and removing them. What we wanted to do is to minimize DOT's cost, and how we have been handling it in some cases in the past is we've gone there every week to post temporary no parking signs and such. What we want to do is post them one time, and then they'll be good for as long as the farmers market is present there. So we would post the permanent no parking signs that might be 8 to 2 Sundays, the permanent no left turn, no right turn signs, and the road closed ahead signs. That is the minimum to protect us in a tort liability situation. And because we're dealing with no left turn, no right turn regulations, we would have to make sure they're posted properly, and they're posted by a qualified sign contractor. So we would use our sign contractor to put in the permanent signs. Depending on the complexity of the situation, how long the farmer's market is, it would cost somewhere in the range of $500 to $2,000 for that one-time cost.
That's a one-time cost to the organizers of the farmers market?
Yes.
Okay. Right. And how about the traffic engineer? Do they have to hire one?
No, we would not require a traffic engineer because they would put it in exactly like this.
Okay.
They wouldn't have to hire a traffic engineer.
Got it. And so can any of these farmers markets put up their own signs? They can't put up their own signs. No, they can't.
We need to make sure that we have a record as to when the tow-away no parking signs were put in. Because if someone's going to be towed, we have to verify that the signs have been posted there at a certain time.
They won't be able to put up their own signs. They're all permanent signs?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, initially, there were discussions that as a cost reduction measure, that maybe with specifications drawn by the department, farmers markets could effectively put in their own signage. Yeah. I was working under that assumption, but I think the department has taken a harder look at this, seen at the necessity of making sure that those permanent parking restrictions are posted properly in the right way for a number of reasons, probably the least of which is liability. But I think we're going to keep working on that issue, to tell you the truth. Because this is new. I know the department has promised to work on costs. It's something that we can pursue as we move forward on this.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, we got to do what we have to in order to make sure we're following our own rules and regulations and that we do not impede on the local community. At the same time, we need to balance that with not putting on too many fees onto the organizers of the event, because...
And even at the 500 to, 2,000 cost, if you amortize that over a number of years that the farmers markets
I see.
have occupied a space, a traditional space, that's not a burdensome cost.
Okay, thank you. I do have some amendments to this report, and if you could give me your thoughts to see what you think about them. Would it be too much to ask for quarterly reports to the Public Works Committee on the progress of rolling out this program?
My understanding that the Bureau of Street Services are going to provide reports back to the council, but I don't know what the frequency is on that. The representatives are here. They may, I would say fine, go ahead, that's great.
Anybody here from Bureau of Street Services? I just don't want to duplicate reporting requirements, and if there's already something you're doing to the full council, let's coordinate.
Good afternoon, Tom Carabello, Bureau of Street Services. Yes, it's a quarterly report that will be submitted between us and our financial management section.
Okay, and can we do that to the Public Works Committee and then to full council? We'll just want to make clear that's the, unless there's some other committee that also, but this is mostly a Public Works Streets issue, right?
One of the unique properties about the ordinance that the council adopted is that for the first time, in a systematic way, we'll be able to monitor and evaluate how these costs are, bring it back to you for any modifications as we move forward in time. Without the tracking and the monitoring, that evaluation process is difficult at best to do. But if we have good numbers, and we see as trend lines go, it will help you make policy in the future.
Well, we can make sure that goes to Public Works Committee and whatever other committee would need to see it. If it comes here, the chair would want to see it, or it's at his disposal. But we can make sure it goes to Public Works Committee as well.
One thing, I was thinking back on one of the meetings, I thought we were going to have some kind of a report back on the overall implementation of the program at some point, but I don't recall the timeline.
I don't recall the timeline. I know that it was requested, but there was never a...
Well, why don't you give us one right now?
Okay. Well, we'll have quarterly reports, and if it could go through the appropriate committees, that'd be great. Secondly, there are 3 markets grandfathered in by motion until the 1st of January of 2010, 1 in February of 2010, and 3 in May of 2010. And I believe that by July 1st, 2010, all markets will be operating on the same level playing field. Can we have the new yearly permits take effect on January 1st, 2010? Would that create a problem?
Actually, I don't. I think that'd be beneficial.
That'll help in smoothing things out, right?
To maintain and to track those, yes.
Okay, so you're okay with that, and it would help smoothing things out and everybody be on the same page?
Again, I think that's a good idea. I just don't know how your event sponsors are going to react to that.
Confirm that's just for the farmers markets.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
But they can get their permits earlier. They're not held to wait till January 1st to get their permits.
No. In fact, we'll encourage them to apply way in advance.
The effect date. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, the effective date. Okay.
The farther in advance, the better, actually.
And on small street closures, can they be exempted from the traffic study rule? Would that create a problem?
You mean like a lane closure, or a street closure?
Or do you mean a neighborhood block party?
A what?
Do you mean a neighborhood block party?
From the requirement, do we have any requirement for a traffic study in any of these?
Not on the block parties, no.
No, and they are already exempted under the block party. Got it. Okay.
Block parties are fairly simple. It's 4 or 5 barricades on each side.
So if they qualify for the block party, they would be exempt anyway, right? So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused by a couple things in the report. On the block parties, it lists cost of $587 or $899 per event, and then it says that there are no fees and costs, and they're subsidized 100% by the council. So are those costs to the council?
Yeah.
Those are the costs against our $100,000 account.
Correct. Those would not be charged to the event sponsor, but it would through the subsidy process. Those would be a part of that. It'd be taken from that subsidy account.
You may have to, that's what we were trying to figure out, you may have to reimburse. They may have to go and pay and get the deal, and you may have to reimburse.
Well, that's what it sounded like to me, and that actually sounds to me like it would make no sense and add a lot of steps and cost. If ultimately it's going to be paid for by the council, why can't this just internally be an accounting process? Because it's going to go from one of our pockets into the other. Why go through all the hassle of having neighborhoods pay for the money, get checks cut back to them? It just seems like if it's just going from one of our accounts to the other, why are we creating all those extra steps?
Mainly because your colleagues wanted to control their money. They did not want anyone to be able to expend or allocate their funds without going through their office. So that's why every office was given their account so they could manage their own.
But it seems like that could be done without anyone else expending money from outside. I don't see why they can't just fill out a form, have it go to the council office, get a check off, and again, it'd still be internal and avoid several steps in the processing and bookkeeping.
Well, part of it, I think, and I think your question's intriguing, and I think we need to work on it. But I think part of it is this is the public right of way, and we are shutting down a street for a specific event, and there are street closure permit fees that need to be paid, and they are assigned to the event sponsor. Let's say for just a block party, you have barriers at the end of the street. You're shutting it down for a period of time, so you do have to follow some of your own internal procedures. One of which is there is a $312 street closure fee.
But the council office you're saying is paying for that.
Yeah, how we do the accounting on that, you may be correct, and maybe we want to refine that in a way that's more expeditious and less onersome, and have it but I don't know the answer to that right now, Councilman. I don't. Maybe I'll get with my colleagues and we'll try to figure out how that can be more efficient.
I hope we can look at that before it comes to council, because it just seems so obvious. The city's charging it, the city, another arm of the city is paying for it, so why anyone else has to come in between just makes no sense to me. It has to cost us more to go through those extra steps and accept money and refund money.
There's probably a good answer to your question. I'm just not thinking of it right now. So I would like to talk with the bureau folks and others and see, maybe even the city attorney, about how that process, if indeed that process that you suggest, where it's just essentially an accounting kind of measure that can be streamlined.
Well, what we found out is that when they go in and make the application, and it then goes, that's when they pay the fee, then it goes to departments to tell what the costs are. And those types of things are well in advance of you being able to react to them, because they're asking you whether you agree with it, and so that's why we said it's a reimbursement, that you pay the fee, all the process is done, and then you reimburse the fee. Otherwise, you're in the front of it, and sometimes you're not prepared to subsidize the fee if you're not familiar with the organization or you don't support the program. So it requires, I think, a proactive sign-off by the council office to then give the reimbursement.
That actually sounds correct.
It still seems like it could be done without money exchanging hands. I don't see how this makes any sense at all, and we've assigned costs up front. So we're not waiting to find out what the costs are. We've decided already with canopies it's one price, without canopies it's another price. So if there's some way to take a look at that, I would appreciate hearing how one could justify it if we move forward with the same process we're talking about.
We'll give that an additional look at.
And also on the farmers markets, are we also having the council offices subsidize the $800 or $1,400 figure, or are those just amounts that we're having the sponsors pay for?
That's up to your discretion. You have a subsidy fund. Farmers markets can be subsidized up to 100% of the cost. So, I mean, that's your discretion how you want to manage your funds. That's why, for one thing, that's why we were so intent in trying to manage these costs in such a way as to reduce the burden both from the event sponsors and any subsidy requests they may make to you with respect to that event.
And I don't know, again, if something similar could be done in the other direction, if there's a request to have those subsidized, if that can't be something that just goes to the council office for approval, and again, if approved, money doesn't have to be expended and reimbursed.
But I agree in the main on that. But the process is such that the event comes in and the departments come back and say, sometimes these things have variance on them. And for instance, let's say a block party, somebody comes in for a block party. But that block party also has games and a petting zoo and, risers and a big tent. And so that may be beyond. And that's not a block party. That's something else. So that's some of the problems. You need to have an accounting of what those costs are, and let that count back to you to make a decision how you want to handle it. On block parties, it's 100%, but you got to be a block party before you can do the 100%.
I think if it's not a block party on a secondary street where they basically are doing most of the work themselves, and you refund them their fees, if it elevates to the petting zoo and everything else, then it could go into the next phase of saying you then are
correct,
maybe considering up to 50% of their fees.
Yeah.
So the issue is that assessment period happens over a longer period of time than just the person saying, I want to do it. And so that's why generally it's a reimbursement up front.
So the things that are more complex could be done by reimbursement, but things that are simple, like, is this a simple block party, yes or no, hopefully could just be done up front and simple and quick and dirty, as they say.
My expectation is, Councilman, as the departments and everybody moves forward on this, and the lines of communication get stronger and more efficient, that we will be able to do these things quicker. If it is indeed just a block party with families and friends getting together, that will be known immediately, and those things can happen quickly. But however, if it goes to the department, they say this is not a block party, it doesn't. It's got too many appendages to it to be called a block party. Then something else. But I think that the process needs to move forward to allow us to refine it as we go, as more experience is gained, and we can come back to you and say, look, we have on our annual reports, we have sufficient new information about how these things work, and we can ask for some modifications.
Fair enough.
Let me ask on the one area that's unclear is on the block parties. Are we still asking them to pick up their own signs for that one block party day a year?
What we'd be asking them to do is to pick up barricades with road closed signs on them from the Vero Street Services. DOT would have to post the temporary no parking signs for the reason that we have to confirm that they were posted as of a certain date, so that if we tow away, they've been posted for 24 hours. But our cost in that would be less than $100.
Okay. So the issue is that you still have to post the signs. They can pick up the barricades, they show up with their insurance policy, and they pay for their permit.
That's correct, yes. As long as they have all their documentation in place, and it's just a matter of coming in and paying for the permit. we'll provide them a location to pick up their own barricades and return them.
And then when they get their deposit on the barricades back upon returning?
As soon as they return them back, there won't be a 60-day or, 90-day process for that.
All right. Then let me ask, on the report back, Mr. Rizar asked for a quarterly. I think we asked somewhere in light of figuring a year-end report that this would be in place for October 26th to June 30th, that we get a fiscal year report back in early August or so that we can see what the whole year and the whole program, so it's not just on farmers markets, but it's looking at the whole ordinance. But somewhere around August of 2010, we can get that 7 or 8 month evaluation of how the whole program and the ordinance impacted, and how the service and what the fine tunes and what the issues we need to address. If we can add that.
That would be fine.
Report. And then, so it's until we get to that point, this is pretty much the final installment of putting all these things in place. And I think people have already seen a remarkable transition in the fact that we have thousands of pieces of paper no longer on the city council agenda with all of the special events and all that other. So that's been a major benefit in the sense of looking at it. Okay. Before we,
I just want to say, like Mr. Smith was saying earlier, I think the biggest problem right now is just the communication between different departments. And the Bureau has already met with representatives from all the council offices already, trying to go over the process. We've actually gone to several community meetings involving special events. So we're trying to get the word out there. But again, from years of doing it different ways, it's going to take folks a while to get on board with what we're trying to do.
have we discussed it all with the benefits of moving off city streets to private property if possible?
Absolutely, absolutely. Every time we get a chance.
All right, very good. Let me ask, Mr. Is it Whipple? Why don't you come up to the chair here? Why don't you sit there, Paul?
Council members, committee members, thank you for the time. I'm here on behalf of the farmers market community in the city of Los Angeles. There's been a little debate on how many there are, but 17 on the street is what it looks like, and then a number that are off-street in parks and other locations. We want to thank you for all the time that you allowed for the CLA to report back and work with the various departments, so a good set of numbers could be come up with, and we're pretty pleased with $800 and $1,400 figures. Some of the questions that you asked the CLA person about how the actual cash or checks will exchange hands still sort of remains to be seen. We don't know who we're going to, I guess, make the payment to. Part of the, I think, question arises out of the fact that it's been online so far. I think with the new annual application, will that still be the case?
I hope so.
Yeah.
We'd hope so too, but the online thing, then that's sort of part of the payment is one of the things.
Right. Our goal is to have to make it available where you can pay with a credit card. You can come into our office. You can mail the payment. Our goal is to be at least a month ahead of the game so that sponsors are fully aware of what the fees are, and they have plenty of time to either make a decision on whether to have the event or cancel the event, and also to bring us payment in. So we're not dealing with these last-minute issues like we have in the past, where we're dealing with the sponsor, hours before the event. So,
great.
That'll be our goal. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think so. There should be a variety of ways, or a couple of ways.
To be able to pay.
We'll be able to figure that out. Well, I think that also the fact that you're going to meet quarterly or periodically to review things is very comforting to the industry. So we appreciate it again, all the hard work, and we hope we can keep.
Give me your card.
Last thing, we'd just like to remain as self-sufficient as possible. That's one thing everybody asks me to say, and we know that'll help keep the costs down. So we're very intent on doing that and have a strong commitment to that, and want to help in return. Thank you.
We have Paula Daniels.
Good afternoon, and thank you. I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I'm a commissioner with the Board of Public Works, and I've been working on some food policy issues and farmers market issues for the city. I first just want to thank our staff at the Bureau of Street Services, as well as the CLA's office, for doing the hard work, and the other staff that did the hard work to look at lowering and annualizing the fees here. I'm pleased to see the information in the report, and I think it does go a long way toward helping the situation. I did have a chance, there are some farmers markets who may be able to manage those fees as they now are, which appear to be around $1,400. But there are still areas of need in the city where it may be very difficult for farmers markets to meet those fees or for new farmers markets to start. So we have had some discussions with some council offices, including Councilmember Huizar's office, about this issue, and there was a request made by the council offices to see if there could be some funds identified that would assist some of those lower income areas or other areas that might be in need, and there has been an effort to identify some of those funds. So if you're interested in that, if that's something you want to discuss as part of your recommendations on the adoption of this report.
Taken care of, that in the ordinance it gives the ability to subsidize farmers markets up to 100% at the discretion of the council office.
Right, I understand. And if that's something, depending on each council office, because each council office would then have to make that decision on an annual basis, but there may also be quite a bit of demand for those funds
Well,
from
I
the
think that's
subsidy
why we
funds.
give it to the council offices, so they have the ability to manage $100,000 a year with their farmers markets, with their 50% on special events, and that's all part of managing the things that they think are the highest priority. But again, the fee down to $1,000 for a year, I don't know many farmers markets that could not pay an annual fee of $1,000 a year.
There are some that will have difficulty with those fees. There are a number who
But I'm saying
can.
the council office is equipped to go up to 100%.
Right. If the council office are interested,
Yeah.
we can identify some other funds, USDAG funds, that would be able to address those fees. So it depends on if you're interested in that.
And we've been into some discussions with the mayor's office and some people in Public Works to see how we could assist those of the 17 that would need assistance in the near future. So we're working on a possible motion, but we're still examining that possibility.
Okay. I really can't pass up an opportunity to say I think Bureau of Street Services did a great job on this. I'm really proud of our team. And I think they'll be doing a good job managing this going forward. And thanks to the CLA's office and Lynn Ozawa in particular. Right, thank you.
Any other? We have the last public comment card. I also want to publicly thank Lynn. You've been working on this for how long? 5 years.
Wow.
For 5 years. We joke with Lynn and tell her that she was 6'5" when she started. And so, but thank you very much, Lynn, because it's been ongoing. Lynn is also the person that put forth the subsidy program for Convention Center for developmental fees, now dealing with these special events. And then the last chapter will be a nonprofit releasing policy. So those are all of those policies that we're putting forth. So thank you very much. The one thing, Paul, I'd ask you, and this is something that comes up periodically in the society issue on the special events, is that there appears to be, and if you read the ordinance, it deals with assembly and parades, that because of the cost of parades, people are now, in the past, they basically looked at them as a special event. They're now moving over, trying to move them into the First Amendment. And if you read the ordinance on the First Amendment parades, it gives a clear impression as though it is a assembly that maybe walks through the community and becomes a parade, but it doesn't give you an impression it's a parade as it relates to a organized parade. And then in the very end of the ordinance, it talks about this ordinance is for non-commercial parades. And what's unclear is what's a non-commercial parade. Is that one that doesn't charge people to be a participant? And so there's a lack of clarity as to just what assemblies and parades and First Amendment compared to historically that we've dealt with them as special events. And to get from under the cost, particularly addressing the public safety costs, that people are saying, let's move over to First Amendment, go to the police commission, get the permit, and all then we're responsible for at most is for the traffic concerns.
Yeah.
So we do need some clarity between the council and what the police department is doing, because it's just, historically, it's been done one way, and all of a sudden, there's an avoidance of what the cost may be. And again, it's a lesser time period to, in the sense of notification. You can have a parade by First Amendment up to 5 days before the event, which gives no one a chance to respond. So these are things that have come about. Historically, if I remember way back when, we used parades as a means, if somebody had an assembly and they did a march,
Right.
was kind of the parade they were talking about. But when you line up and you have a variety of paid participants, I don't know if whether that's the First Amendment that ordinance is talking about.
We'll work on that.
Yeah,
We'll
but
take it.
that's an issue that we're confronted with right now on a couple of issues, and it will continue to evolve because it seems as though all of a sudden everybody figured it out at the same time. They were being asked to pay 50% of their special event fees, and immediately they said, we're a First Amendment parade.
Okay. We'll work on that.
Okay.
We'll give also the clerk the change on those fees from building and safety on the block parties
Okay.
to lower them.
Okay, we'll move item 5.
Okay, that takes us to item 8, and actually, items 8 and 9 probably should be discussed together. 8 is the El Pueblo report in response to the Controller's June 24th, 2009 audit, and item 9 was basically the Controller report relative to review of internal controls at El Pueblo.
Okay, we'll handle 8 and 9 together, but let me ask, Mr. Jimenez, you put in the card for both, if you can come up and make your comments, and then Mr. Weezer will carry this discussion.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Jimenez, and I'm representing Vivian Bonzo, the president of the Alvera Street Merchants Association. And today, I was asked to speak on behalf of the president. First, I'd like to note for the record that the Alvera Street Merchants Association is not opposed to increases in either the rent or the common area maintenance fee. What concerns the association is the calculation and the methodology used to arrive at this number. We have not seen the numbers from the administration, and my understanding, it's been almost about a year that they've been calculating and recalculating these numbers. Also, El Pueblo administration is silent on how it will handle Chapter 25B of the charter. This relates to the negotiation of long-term leases with the merchants. El Pueblo's response in this audit is to use the Simpson-Jones lease as the template for the existing merchants. But it was never originally intended for that purpose. And this response doesn't address those 17 merchants who currently have a 55-year long-term lease that was signed between 2000 and 2001. Regarding the CAM fees, it is also an issue of calculation. Considering the large amount of vacant space, the nonprofits, and actually El Pueblo's administration, the fees that are going to be charged to the merchants is disproportionate, and they are the only income-producing entity on the park. Finally, I'd like to close with 2 more items. The first one is, when I came before the audit committee, we had presented, we proposed to present our response to the audit. At that time, Councilman Weezer had asked Mr. Andrade to incorporate his responses In his response, we have yet to see that. Finally, if we talk about good faith in negotiation and discussions between the merchants and El Pueblo, we've been working with El Pueblo to negotiate a $50,000 traditional events contract since May, and it has not yet been finalized. And our first event, which took place for Dia de los Muertos, we still have $12,000 of unpaid bills because that contract is somewhere between their contractor, Grand Performances, and the Pueblo administration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Let me ask the staff to come up, and I'm hopeful they'll be able to respond to your concerns.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. Robert Andrade, General Manager.
First question is, did you incorporate the responses to the Merchants Association to the Controller's audit in your reports?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I don't recall those instructions of incorporating responses by any public members as part of our formal response to the Controller.
Okay.
I mean, they could be part of the council.
Did you have a chance to review them?
I perused them.
Okay. Anything that stands out that you would like to address or respond in those?
No, not really.
Okay. We heard this item in the Audits and Government to Efficiency Committee, pretty extensive conversations. A lot of what we are looking for is to make El Pueblo self-sufficient, and we were on a timeline to get the leases signed and delivered by December 1st. What's today's date? Today is the
23rd, I believe.
23rd. So we have 7 days or 8 days?
Yes.
Where are we?
We're 8 days out. No, I apologize for that. With respect to lease terms, we've had conference with the mayor's office and with the city attorney. And as I had mentioned previously, there are a couple of sticky issues that still needed to be resolved. We believe that we're very near that, with the exception of one slight piece. With respect to the dollars and the costs, we did on Friday receive the final approval of the Rigs and Rigs study. So there may have been a misinformation provided to you by a representative from the Olvera Street Merchants Association. It's true that there was a study done in 2008. However, we were compelled to go back and have that study redone, because by the time those numbers came to us, it was after 6 months, and we thought we should, and we know that the economy has also changed a bit. So we thought, in the interest of fair play and of the interest certainly of the city, to have more accurate numbers, we went back through General Services to Rigs and Rigs. That study has just been accepted by, although we had the numbers, preliminary numbers, we actually, on Friday, I actually received the final copy that the GSD had signed off on. So those figures are now available. I'd like to share them with your office and certainly with the mayor's office, but they will become public at that time. Secondarily, the CAM rates, and there's some suggestion. It took a rather extensive study to do that, and the CLA as well as our offices were involved in that. And so those pieces that are not common area have been eliminated. So we now have those figures, and I'm encouraged that representatives from the Olvera Street Merchants are interested in signing off on those leases. As far as I'm concerned, and I certainly am willing to hear other sides of the argument, but these numbers are not negotiable. These are the rents that are market rate. This is the CAM that is what it is. It's not a matter of sitting down and saying, well, we disagree with your numbers. One can disagree with the numbers all they want, but they are what they are.
So we're 7, 8 days away from December 1st. In order for you to go back and negotiate with 61 merchants, it seems like it will take a while.
Yeah.
So do you anticipate that you will have them executed before December 31st?
No, I don't believe so. What I would like to do, though, however, is certainly work with your office, working with the mayor's office, because I'll be extremely candid. I'm waiting for the gun to go off, so to speak, for the,
So we have the CAM study, we have a fee study.
correct.
So now it's just a matter of running those by our office, the mayor's office, the city family.
Correct.
And you would go negotiate with the tenants.
Yeah, we would be negotiating some of those other terms, with respect to long-term leases, how that's defined. Prop H never defined what long-term is. But with respect to the numbers, those would not be negotiable.
Oh, I see. Okay. And so what timeline are you looking at? What do you anticipate? Because I asked you a very straightforward, direct question last time we were here a few months back, that
Yes.
what day do you need or think we have these leases executed? And you said December 1st, December 31st. So
What I'm hoping to have leases executed, or certainly decisions on rents, prior to prior to the mayor's budget deliberations to the council. That way we can roll those numbers into the budget.
into next year's budget. So you would have, depending upon the execution of the leases for July 1st, 2010 budget year, fiscal year, we would know, it'll be, the 10-11 fiscal year, we would have rolled in the anticipated revenue, additional revenue because of the leases.
Correct.
Okay. And one final question. The issue of the long-term leases and the charter amendment, how are we handling that? Or how do you anticipate to handle
Well, there's varying viewpoints within the city family. So that has not been settled. Typically, a long-term lease, I think, by law, can go up to 55 years. However, and I do not want to speak to the city, for the city attorney. We've had discussions relative to how do we define a long-term lease? So it really is a legal fine point. As far as we're concerned, we think it's less than that. However, we also want to recognize, and this is going to be a subtle distinction when we negotiate. We have some merchants who have been on the street for a very long time, and we acknowledge that, and we recognize their contributions. The strict interpretation of Prop H says merchants who were working and who were merchants as of 1997. We believe those merchants who had leases or agreements up to 1997 deserve a long-term lease, however that's defined. Any merchant that came subsequent to that, really the Prop H does not apply to them. And so we would look to have leases that would be somewhat shorter for those, perhaps very similar to the Simpson-Jones, the 5+5.
Okay. Previously, we discussed September 16th as a significant day, not only because of Mexico's independence and the significance that plays for El Pueblo, but that was a day you were to come back to us on what the plan would be as we move forward. I would request that February 14th, Valentine's Day, that you come back with executed leases for all the 61 tenants. We really need to get these done as soon as possible, and so if we could get them done by February 14th or 15th, and then we could see how they're working out, and we would definitely roll it into next year's fiscal year, but February 15th, if we could report back to this committee on or near that day to let us know that all the leases have been executed. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if I could ask you to also review the Merchants Association's responses to the audits, and if you could draft a report to this committee and bring it back at that date as well.
You want me to respond to their
If
items?
there's any significant issues there that that you think may be worthy of discussion, or if there's a contrary opinion as well, that would be helpful. Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Andrade.
You're welcome, sir.
No additional questions on
So
that?
we're asking for a report back on the 15th or February 15th or sometime around that time. Should we continue these items, Mr. Chair, or?
The thing is
till
that
then?
we have, I think audits has already dealt with this.
Yes.
I would think that we, note and file it and send it forward and then get the report back.
Okay. Well, no, yeah.
We'll note and file this and send it to council, but ask for a report back in February 2010. And I think the big thing, if other members of the committee were here, the urgency is the big issue, because I think we've been debating and discussing this for at least 3 consecutive budget years. So
We have, Your Honor, yeah.
So we'd ask for whatever urgency you can place on it. Okay, thank you. You'll receive and file, or note and file this report for 8 and 9, and move it to council, and then direct a report back for February 2010.
Mr. Chair, my apologies, I had to step out during the last item. I was wondering, did we include finding a way to accept the funds that were identified by Ms. Daniels in the motion on street?
I think that she was...
Street festivals and
I think
such.
she was going to be looking, Ms. Daniels had a recommendation about some funds.
Yes.
And I think Mr. Rezar is working with her to see how those funds can become available.
We're currently working on a motion to present to council to find some funds to assist those 17 markets that may be in need of...
So we don't need to include that in our motion?
I'd be happy to talk to you about that as well. See if we can present that motion together, if you like.
Right.
Yeah.
That would be terrific. Thank you.
Then let me ask, did we reconsider number 5? There's a couple of corrections. And Lynn, if you can come up and give the corrections on the recommendations of the CLA report.
Yes, based on the Department of Transportation's concerns about the city actually installing the signage regarding parking and traffic management, we would like to amend recommendation number 4 to say, direct the event sponsors of farmers markets as a condition of being granted a special event permit that requires a street closure to pay the city to install permanent signage in accordance with the Department of Transportation standard drawing for farmers market street closures. And then number 5, be similarly amended to say, direct the event sponsors of block parties as a condition of being granted a special event permit that requires a street closure to pay the city to install temporary signage in accordance with the Department of Transportation standard drawing for block party street closures. And I will give you the language.
Could I ask one quick question on the block party part? Again, I thought we were covering the costs fully, subsidizing them 100%. So how would we have wording that would have them paying for that?
I think we should get into reimbursement. What DOT says clearly is that they have to put the signs up in order if somebody gets towed the next day for violating them. So there's a minor cost, but it all could be part of the reimbursement of the 100% for block parties and for farmers markets.
Can that in some way be simplified so it's added to whatever the other overall number is that they automatically are charged?
I don't know if, the thing we'd have to check with them, I don't know if DOT is still here, but I think it's 2 different departments. The fee goes to
Street
services, and the fee for the signs is DOT. I don't know whether they can
Well,
merge
street
that.
services can collect the fee for both.
Okay, so that.
Hopefully that could just be added to the number, and I know it was a pretty de minimis number. They said it was under $100,
Yeah.
so.
So I think we'd have to work out the mechanics, so that when they pay the fee, the signage should be part of it, or whatever we need to do.
So instead of $800, it's $900, whatever it is, we
Right.
just
And it would
keep
be
it
a
simple.
one-time fee. So the following year, the fee would go back down to 800 or whatever the fee
If
might
it's a
be.
permanent sign.
Yes, right.
But on block parties, we wouldn't have a permanent sign, because it's one day.
Yes,
deal.
absolutely.
But
So that
fee
would be a
for
continuing.
farmers markets would be consistent.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, next item.
Okay, item 11, which is a CO and Board of Police Commissioners report relative to a grant award amount of $100,000 from Department of Alcohol Beverage Control for the Police Department's Operation ABC program and related actions. The department's requesting to accept the grant award of $100,000 for enforcement of Operation ABC. This operation focused on enforcement of alcohol laws, illegal drugs, sales of alcohol beverages to minors, and other related activities. And Jason here to provide more information.
Yeah, let me just go through. Jason gave a very good report at personnel. And one of the reasons that we asked in this year's assignments that grants that impact the general fund come to budget and finance is the issue, and I think this is something to just bring it up, is that here's a grant, and certainly everybody supports it. It's been around 14 years, I believe. But what becomes confusing is that we, as a CAO, cuts the resolution authorities out of the budget because of financial issues. And so therefore, we're accepting this $100,000, and we remove the resolution authorities. In talking to the department in personnel, they said they're merely going to go to the department and say, give me 2 more positions, which basically defeats the purpose of cutting the resolution authorities. My assumption that the reason the CAO cut the resolution authorities, they didn't want to spend the $200,000 to support the grant. That's what I would assume. And so we're back into the same ballpark if they merely go within the department to get the resolution authority or get positions. And what we mentioned to them in personnel, you're in effect budgeting without going through the budget process, because you could be taking Sergeant 2 positions that the council has agreed should be funded, and you're moving them to something else. And so that's what the reason we brought it here, because it appears that the cut was done for a legitimate reason, but yet the department has decided there was an alternative to the cut, and they'll just go get the positions through their personnel department. What we used to do in the past is that they would hold vacancies for 2 P3s or a couple of P2s. They would hold them to get, if they're going to do this. But the issue is, it just seemed inconsistent that we'd be cutting in the budget process and they'd be replacing in their internal department process to keep a function going that the CAO in the budget said, we're not going to give you $200,000 to support a $100,000 grant. So I wanted to get it clarified in budget of how we should be dealing with these issues as opposed to just compensating for the budget cut.
So the answer to your question was, the grant was originally started out with 2 resolution authorities for sergeants. One of the original resolution authorities was changed to a regular authority through the 2007-2008 budget process. The department requested regularization of the authority, and that was granted by the council and the mayor. With the current position, our intention in our report was...
The second position.
Yeah, the second position, which is the current resolution position that we did not recommend continuance of. Okay. When we received the department's transmittal, we discussed different options for continuing the position without the resolution authority with the department. The resolution that we came with was that the department would supply an existing vacant regular authority to continue this program. So there wouldn't be an impact on services or funding, because the resolution position was funded through the 2009-10 adopted budget. So all we're doing is moving the funding from the resolution position to the regular position, which was unfunded during the budget process. So there's no general fund impact, because we're just moving the funding from a resolution authority to the regular authority. Because the existing regular authority is vacant, the department is unable to fill that position at this time due to the budget situation. They're just going to loan it to Detective Support and Vice Division until the city has enough money to allow the department to request additional sergeant positions. So if the department 2-3 years down the road needs additional sergeant authorities, then through the formal budget process, they will request those authorities, and they will specify that they need these authorities for the purpose of continuing this grant program if funding or for this program is not continued, or if the internal affairs group position is needed for internal affairs.
But then answer me, how are they going to deal in the interim with administering the $100,000 grant? What positions are going to manage that?
The same 2 positions that are currently managing it. Mm-hmm. It's just on paper, we're changing the way that the positions are accounted for. So the department has an existing vacant regular authority, and we're going to move the only resolution authority sergeant for this program into that vacant authority.
Okay, where's that vacant authority coming from?
It's coming from the internal affairs group.
Okay, so there'll be one down in internal affairs
Correct.
and to manage this program?
Yes.
So that's been identified in the sense, because I didn't see that in the report. So that's happened since the Personnel Committee?
Yes, it wasn't, see, my apologies for that. We worked this out with the department prior to the release of the CAO report. So we had worked out the details and the department was in agreement of how we were going to move position authorities around to continue that. So I should have included that in my report.
Yeah, the department didn't seem to be aware of that at Personnel.
Captain Young wasn't aware of it because she knew that she was going to continue to have the bodies to do the program. It was more of a, the personnel coordinators saying that this is where we're going to get the position from and we're going to move it to in order to continue this program since we can't fill this internal affairs position currently.
Okay, and the reason we can't fill it is why? Managed hiring or?
It's a combination of the mayor and council only authorizing the department to hire to attrition as well as the hiring freeze. So they have an existing vacant sergeant position, and it's been vacant all fiscal year, so they're not allowed to backfill that position. So on paper, we're just going to move it over to the Detective Advice and Support.
Okay, so that it will remain that way until they budget for a second position?
Correct.
That answers it. 'Cause it was confusing, particularly when the department was saying, we'll just go to personnel and get another position. You said, well, that's contrary to what the CO's cuts were, so that
Right,
clarified.
the disconnect was they were talking about they were going to go to their internal personnel control to get the positions, and that had already been worked out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We'll move that item. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Are we ready for item number 4? This is the joint CAO and CLA report relative to the MICLA financing for the Vine Street and ASO Street parking facilities and declaration of revised 2008-2009 special parking revenue fund surplus transfer. Approve on consent?
I wish we could. Yeah.
Good afternoon, council members. Janice Chang, Office of the CAO. The report you have before you is a recommendation from the CAO and CLA on a $39 million surplus transfer to the reserve fund from the Special Parking Revenue Fund. It also requests $21 million in MICLA financing to complete the IESO Street and Vine Street garage projects. And in addition, the report addresses several questions that the committee had in its prior meeting in August regarding 2 motions that were put forth on the use of funding SPRF funds for the Vine Street and IESO Street garage projects, the current debt obligations in the SPRF, and the impact to the reserve fund if the transfer does not occur.
Let me ask you one thing, and I saw Natalie here earlier. Is she still here?
She left.
Because one of the things we had talked about a couple of days ago, we were talking about MICLA in this report. Do we have the ability to use, the America bonds that give you a discount or something on interest?
I was informed that recovery bonds are, the Vine Street and IESO garage projects are eligible for the recovery bonds. The process would be through MICLA, and the debt service would be subsidized by the recovery bonds at the rate of 45%, I believe.
Okay, so we'd go through, explain it, we go through MICLA to get the financing?
Correct.
And then
the debt service that is paid on the projects through MICLA would be subsidized by the recovery bonds.
Okay, we wouldn't replace the MICLA with recovery bonds at some point?
No. The recovery bonds would just assist in repaying the debt
Okay.
service.
But we would save about 45% of the interest
Correct.
over what,
Or-
30 years or whatever?
It's basically the life of the bond, but basically 30 years.
Yeah. So that would be a significant savings?
Yes.
Okay, so is that now, because it's not in the report, is that our recommendation now, is to,
We can add that to the report. It does not change, it wouldn't change the recommendation in the report. The report only recommends that MICLA be used for the projects, and MICLA would still be used if we were to use the recovery bonds to subsidize those.
But I mean, it would change to some degree our debt service and what we're paying on an annual basis.
Correct, the impact would change.
Okay, so that would be our ongoing cost as it relates to the general fund.
Yes.
Okay, so the thing is that, so when you say eligible, what is the process? Because I understand we have capacity to include that for these recovery bonds in that fashion. So what is the process to cause that to occur?
I am not familiar with that process.
If I may, basically what we're recommending, right now, using MICLA CP, which is sort of the short-term notes, and, the interest rate is very, very low. If you recall, a week or two ago, we actually released a report where we're actually taking our CP and converting it to long-term. Okay, and in that report, we were going out to regular MICLA, and then also we were going to be using some of the ARA ability to finance some of the projects. Here again, we'd have to look at the mix and where we are in that process, whether or not we can fold those in. But right now, we're just looking at CP for these particular projects right now.
Okay, now, there's Natalie.
Sorry. Natalie Brill, CAO's office.
We're asking the question about the
ARA availability, and how it fit into with relationship to the two projects.
Once the projects are completed, we usually fix them out to long-term. They're in commercial paper. They would be in commercial paper right now. The issue with ARA is that we would have to issue before the end of December next year, 2010, to take advantage of the interest rate. So one of the things we're looking at is how far into construction all these projects are so that we can issue. But we definitely want to take advantage of the 45% interest rate subsidy that the federal government's giving. Absolutely.
So
but it's still general fund, right?
Key being actually when these projects, Vine Street, I believe, is not in construction yet, or it will be, I think, awarded fairly quickly.
It has already been
but it's
awarded.
after construction, yeah.
Correct.
All right, so the thing is, the dollar value that we're talking about for MICLA for the two projects, we would fund both of them in total with MICLA.
CP right now.
All right, CP. And at some point, when you made them into long-term is when the ARA comes into effect.
Yeah.
Correct.
That's not going to affect anything in this report.
No.
Okay. So then we go to step two. So then for the special parking revenue fund, our goal is to put that into the reserve fund. The difference is between the two motions is about $1 million.
Yeah, we're recommending 39.3.
Okay, but now is the 39.3 take into consideration the money left into Lamert Park, and I think there was one other cost factor in it, or is that?
As I understand it, leaves some funding for that particular.
Correct. The recommendation of the CAO and CLA does take into consideration $100,000 to be placed back into the Lamert Park account for the upgrade, I believe, of the lot there.
Okay.
And previously, there was an issue with insufficient funding for the Vine Street garage.
It came in below.
I'm sorry?
It came in below bid.
Correct. The project, the construction bid came in below what was projected, about $3.5 million below what was projected. So we believe that the additional funding was no longer needed.
Okay, that was one of the motions that asked for $2 million to go into that.
Correct.
So we no longer need that.
Correct.
Okay. And so so we got that resolved with the $39 million goes into reserve fund, and there's no earmarks on that. That goes directly into the reserve fund, right?
I'm sorry, basically the 39 will go into the reserve fund, and you're asking whether there's any earmarks against it already?
Pre-planned to be spent is going to the reserve fund.
Well, let's just say out of the 405 shortfall that we're assuming this year, we've hopefully have solved for 3/4 of that, leaving about $98 million that we still have to solve for this year. We are going to be coming forward after we get a little bit more information from the ERIP, the impact, fiscally on departments. And then we'll come back in January with a report on some additional, basically where we are, what we think we know, and some of the solutions in departments. But we're hopefully going to come back with more reductions and potential layoffs in dealing with the $98 million. If we do not, then the other option we have is going to the reserve fund.
Okay. And then now we get back to the Special Parking Revenue Fund. Historically, we had a verbal agreement that in using the fund, we would not take money that was basically committed or earmarked. And yet, when we have this report, we actually identify the projects we're taking it out of.
Correct. The assumption in the projects that are listed, which are listed in attachment 1A, gives a summary of the projects that are affected. The assumption is that most of these projects are either complete or are indefinitely stalled. And
Indefinitely what?
Indefinitely stalled, not moving forward or have not moved forward in several years. And there was some discussion with council offices on the use of some of these funds. And there was also discussions on using future revenue into the Special Parking Revenue Fund if the projects were to be revived or needed funding, that there would be funding identified. And the process would be the normal process in which capital projects are developed through the Department of Transportation, identifying available funding within the Special Parking Revenue Fund to support those projects.
Okay. The thing is that I think what happened, and I know it was an oversight on my part, I didn't look at that ordinance that was approved as part of the budget as closely as I should have, because in effect, when you read it again, it basically shows we're paying back the fund with future funds from the same account. And it's the only time I've ever seen that we pay back a debt with future funds from the same account. And so we wanted to correct that on change that ordinance to where it is a loan, and that we solidify from somewhat in DOT that actually keeps an accounting of projects that money is earmarked or dedicated to, and that we basically in the future, if we're going to loan money, that there is a requirement to pay it back, and that we not have this situation. Because what's strange about this year is that we're talking about loaning $39 million to the reserve fund. At the same time, we're talking about waiving a $19 million allocation to close out LADOT's budget for last fiscal year, because they didn't have money from special parking revenue to pay for some of the positions that are allocated by them. So we're using this money and we're sloshing it around, and it gets kind of confusing that we're not paying our bills for LADOT and their positions, but yet we move the money to the reserve fund, and then we got to close their accounts later on because we've used the special parking revenue. And what I'm trying to do is have a special parking revenue fund be used for its intended purpose, which is fairly clear. It's to be dealing with parking meters, parking structures, and that we not take it over time and not return it for its intended purpose, because the general theory of P3 that was brought to us was that we were so far behind on the maintenance and care of our meters and parking lots that we should sell them. And the reverse of that is, if we used our special parking revenue fund for its intended purpose, we wouldn't be behind on our parking lots and meters. And so that's the thing that we're trying to get, that came out of budget and finance, was we need to come up with a system that doesn't take the special parking revenue fund and move it and never return it, and that we not use it as a slush fund, that we use it very specifically as its intended purpose, and that we have in it an ability when we take it, that we not take it from projects that are designated, but that we, and also that it's earmarked, because council offices are building up these accounts so that they can build something, that we don't take that money and not pay it back. And I think that's what we need in the wording. And I realize, we've been told by the city attorney's office we can't tie the hands of future councils. They can vote any of these policies out with 8 votes. So we're just putting something in place that we believe is manageable at this time and makes it more sensible. So we need to get, as we're moving forward on this, the new ordinance that will correct the oversight from the prior ordinance, and that we actually have a funding mechanism to pay it back, and that we also have some standards as what's eligible and ineligible as relates to funds within the special parking revenue. And so we'd ask the CAO and the city attorney to get together and create that wording so that we can have a legitimate way of keeping those funds as it's intended. And then when we get ready to go out for an RFP for meters and a few other things, we'll have the funds available to do the very job the money was intended. And so we need to correct some of this so that we're not moving this money around year to year, because I think if we look over a 3 to 5 year period on meters and parking lots, we would never find a surplus because they're in that level of disrepair. But if we narrow it and focus it on 1 year at a time, we can always find a reason to take it, but we have to find a reason to give it back.
Is your intention to identify all of the surplus funds as a loan to be returned?
That's the intent, because otherwise we shouldn't collect it under the label of a special fund for parking and then take it and never return it. I don't think we do that for, what is it, Public Works Trust Fund? I don't think that we do that for any other fund that we manage.
Well, I guess there's a couple of issues here. If you look at actually what's being pulled out of projects, is actually very little. I mean, when it comes to Vine Street, there's cash there. So what we're saying, well, let's, debt finance that and pull the cash out. I mean, either way, we basically, because we need the cash, we'd like to get into the reserve, then we're making a conscious decision that we're going to finance that over, 20 or 30 years, whatever the life of the bonds are. There's actually very little that's in actually projects or potential designated projects, actually very little left there that we're proposing to sweep.
Well, I mean, but the bulk of it, if it's undesignated, it's money that's available but has not been put into a project. At some point in time, that money's got to come back. Otherwise, we'll never get to the projects that we intend to do.
Well, I mean, but we're basically going to go forward with AASO. I mean, that's under construction now. We have Vine Street. It's basically a decision to take the cash and replace it with debt financing.
Yeah, but he says we need a systematic approach to it. He's doing haphazardly.
But I think the issue is, I understand Vine Street and the others, that there's money there that we want to take and replace it. But if you take $39 million and it never comes back to the fund, what are all the projects that should have been done with the $39 million? We never get to them. But yet we collect the money under a very specific label of special parking revenue that clearly identifies what its usages are.
Agreed, but I guess if you look at the list as far as what's projects that are here, there's 4 projects, 5 projects at the most here, and it's very little dollar amount.
I don't disagree. I'm just saying we should have a mechanism. I'm concerned about those that are identified as designated, but I'm also concerned about that pool of money that is not designated that never comes back into the fund. And so therefore, we put it into the general fund and it goes away. And next year we collect meters and parking lots. And if we had a 4 or 5 year plan on how to deal with meters and parking lots, none of this money would be surplus. We only surplus it because we need the cash and we can create a definition to move it. The thing is that we have to find a way to deal with special parking revenue as it was intended. And if we borrow it, we should have a rationale for paying it back. And, I think it was ingenious of the CAO to come up with the 5% rule that said we'll pay it back if we ever reach the reserve fund of 5%. The only problem is, in our history, we've never reached 5%. So in effect, if we buy that, we'd never pay it back. So I thought it was ingenious, but
but it is our goal to get to 5% at some point.
No, but that's what we need to get to, because I think we unnecessarily, and again, if we're going to take the special parking revenue fund out of the system and put it into the general fund, and then we want to then return to close out LADOT's books and give them 19 million because we took the special parking revenue that pays for those positions, and then we say, let's waive it and forgive them, then why did we take it in the first place?
Yeah, well, the 19 million, I think we should hold sort of separately, because it was placed in as a source of funds to DOT when the budget was put together, but we found out later on that was actually probably incorrect, and we could not actually lay out all of those charges and charge directly, basically had a source of fund to DOT, so that basically it was incorrectly budgeted.
But I think at the end of the day...
So that you got to pull that sort of
we're
separate.
waiving those fees. We closed their books with $19 million for 07, 08, and then we say, let's waive them and forgive them because they have no ability to pay them. But at the same time, we're taking the special parking revenue and moving it to the...
But we'll never be able to use a special parking and go back and repay those. That's the whole point. Basically, we incorrectly use a lot of money as a source of funds, and we cannot legitimately charge off the special fund for those activities.
But if they were in special parking revenue, we'd be able to be looking over a period of how to spend that money on meters, upgrading meters.
Well, yeah, that's a separate issue. That becomes a separate issue. But I guess, over the last 2 years, we sort of have changed the ordinance for special parking to actually pull money into the reserve fund. And we've been talking about a P3 with garages. We're getting to the point where we do have to, it's going to come up again, having the policy discussion on what we're going to do with special parking. I mean, are we going to do away with it and then have the meter money, if it doesn't go to a P3, come into the general fund, or whether it's going to stay into the special fund? We're going to have that discussion as we come forward with the P3 report.
But again, the P3 report is something that's informational to the council. I don't think anybody's bought into P3 as a way to go. But I think what we're going to find when P3 report comes in, if we had special parking revenue funds and used them as they intended, we could also increase our revenue on parking meters and parking garages, and also provide parking in the local community. But if we keep taking it, it never comes back, and we never solve the parking issue.
Well, that's true. And if you decide to basically separate the garages and meters, which is the path the council is on, you take the garage money, you pay off the bonds, and that you're sort of done with it there. And then the meter revenue, you'll still have continue rolling into the fund for uses for the council.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that we need to reestablish, we need to have some clarity, number one, as to what's eligible and ineligible for loan. And secondly, we need to have a repayment plan if we loan. Otherwise, then at some point, like you said, then if we got rid of the special parking revenue fund and we said it doesn't exist, then the money just comes in the general fund, we spend it as intended, but there's nothing available to deal with meters and parking lots as earmarked the way the fund is set up. And so I think that what my general sense is, most people on the council, from what I get out of it, would like to have the special parking revenue fund. They'd also like to make sure it's expended as intended, as opposed to it becomes an end-of-year budget gap issue for the general fund. So that's what we're trying to get to, and that's why we talked about it the last couple of years, to have an ordinance that says, as we're creating one that says what is a surplus, we have an ordinance that says what is a payback, and that we deal with those issues in one and the same. And we get rid of the 5% issue because we pretty well figured it out that as you read it twice, that means you never pay back. Just as when we read the ordinance twice that said how you pay back, and it says we pay you with your own money, we figured that one out too. So those are two that we need to correct.
The reserve fund is very important. As you know, we worked on getting to that 5% policy, sir.
Reserve fund is very, very important.
And it'll come up.
The commitment we make out in the public about solving neighborhood parking and the meters and the funds and all that other stuff. And I think it becomes very clear, if a private company comes in and tells you, I'll buy your meters for $1 billion, they're pretty well telling you that they can make money off those meters. We can also if we invest in them. But we can't invest in them if the money that we collect for them disappears.
Councilmember, if I may, the development of the 0910 Special Parking Revenue Fund budget assumed that that the city would go to P3 for meters and structures. So when we developed the budget, we didn't put in money to upgrade the meters, assuming that those would go out.
I know that was a mistake.
In the development of the 10, 11, and future budgets, we can definitely put that in if that's, at the discretion of the council.
We told the mayor's office when they did that, there was nobody that agreed with P3. But to put $80 million in the budget to say we're going to get out of P3 before anyone agreed to sell a meter or a parking lot was an $80 million hole that was created unnecessarily. And so the issue is that if we have money in the Special Parking Revenue Fund that can do the very thing that P3 does, we generally would be in better shape to do it as opposed to all of the issues that come up with a P3, such as lack of control on the dollars that parking costs and a variety of other things. And so that's why we as a committee said that we needed to make sure that we had in our ordinance a repayment plan, not a repayment plan that said in the future we'll look at Special Parking Revenue Fund and give it back to you. That's not paying back. That's basically, as we said in one of our prior meetings, that's kind of like laundering the money. The issue is we think there should be a commitment if we take it to pay it back, just like we do with any other fees that we take. And secondarily, we need to make sure that the Special Parking Revenue Fund, while it exists, if it disappears and we find that there's no longer a need to have it, then we should not have it and go do something else. But we shouldn't pretend that the definition is there and not use it. So.
Thank you. So what we are doing in this action is we're sweeping 39.3 million in surplus SPRF funds and transferring that to the reserve fund, right? And those are from various accounts.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, and yeah, okay, go ahead, sorry.
That's one piece, correct? Am I wrong on that?
No, that's correct.
Okay. And secondly, we are issuing 21 million in nickel debt to finance the construction of 2 parking facilities.
Correct.
Okay, that's correct. And these have been in the works, and we own the property, and so we're issuing the nickel.
Yes.
Why not use some of that SPRF money that we are sweeping and put that in to use for the garages themselves?
Because we're actually trying to pull cash out and get it into the reserve fund. We're making a conscious effort that for both these projects, we're going to replace the cash with MECLA CP and pay those costs over 20 or 30 years, whatever the life of it is.
Okay, so we're making that conscious.
Because
Aisle
yeah.
Street is already in construction, and Vine Street's already been awarded.
Okay.
But they are being, so at this point, they're already been funded. The question was where the source of funding would come from.
Yeah, so like you said, it's basically we're replacing the cash and financing over because we need the cash in the reserve fund.
We need the cash in the reserve fund. That's a goal here.
Yep, and with the ISO project, we're already using about 17 million for that particular project, and we're just asking for additional 6.
Okay. Now, are we constructing any other garages?
Are there any other garages? I'm sorry?
Yeah, are we constructing or planning to construct any other garages?
No, because we're in the middle of doing this P3 evaluation. The report will probably be in council in about 3 weeks. So right now, I think that the CO's position is that if we're recommending a concession or not, depending on what the report says, that we really need to evaluate the parking structures before we recommend any others.
Okay, and how about so would the motion on the Broadway garage structure, what would that fall in? Would you then recommend against that because of your P3 recommendation?
I think that Mr. Santana had a conversation, so I'm not sure exactly what that conversation was with you.
Okay.
Wasn't privy to that, so I don't know the answer to that. Ray may know.
Ray, do you know?
I do know that she's had, I think, a conversation with your office, and we would like to, given that the P3 report's going to be coming out, I think there's some discrepancy in some of the data, and so we'd like to have a further conversation with your office.
Okay. Eric, did they have that conversation with you? No? Is Jessica here to see what conversation we had? Want to get on the phone, please? We were, back in 2 years ago, we swept $12 million of my SPRF funds. There were some verbal agreements that we would be helped whenever we planned to build the Broadway garage, because we had been eyeing that money for a Broadway garage for some time, for 2 years since I had gone here. So there were some verbal commitments made, and I'm wondering if that was any part of the conversation or where we are with that.
I apologize.
Yes.
There were some verbal commitments. We understand that. I think that one of the issues that we have is the level of MICLA that we're at right now. The economy has changed dramatically. We've also had a parking study that's been done that we'll be releasing with the report, and I think that parking study talks about citywide parking and the need for parking citywide as part of the P3 concession. And I think I think we need to release that and to show where the city is in parking.
Okay, well, there's been parking studies for the downtown area and for Broadway in particular that show that there is a need for parking. A recent study just came out last week that showed the economic benefits of revitalizing that corridor should we construct a parking garage there. So I haven't seen your report, but I'm sure we could show a need just as well and show other perspective on that. It sounds to me like you are now recommending to me that we not build a garage on Broadway based upon the P3 study and this other study, which I just hear about right now. Is that correct?
Well, I think we looked at the 6 main structures, and the parking consultant did look at vacancy rates and looked at other issues that will be discussed in the report. I can only talk, to what, we've seen there.
Well, we seem to, there's 2 garages that are moving forward today. So why not include the Broadway structure in these 2 other garages that are moving forward today? I'll take back my $12 million from the SPRF instead of going to the unreserved fund, and I'll ask for $12 million for the in MICLA, because in actuality, the report here says that we are asking for $56 million for the Broadway structure, which is not correct. It's really half of that for the acquisition of the property, and the other half is for construction. The second half, we're thinking of doing a public-private partnership that would lessen, if not cost us nothing. So why not include the Broadway parking structure here, since we seem to be letting these 2 go before your report that's going to reevaluate what garages we build throughout the city?
I think that one of the things we're looking at is whether or not we look at structures and we look at how economically viable they are. And none of our parking structures right now pay for themselves. They don't pay for the debt service. They don't break even with O&M and debt service. So one of the things that we're looking at is, if that's the case, because of the bonds that are on them, it limits what we can do with the parking structure.
I'm not asking about, I'm saying, earlier I was asking you about the Broadway garage structure, and you said there's a report forthcoming that we are reevaluating what parking structures we have to build.
Correct.
Well, there's 2 going forward today. Why are we going forward with 2 today, and how it's saying we're going to hold back on the Broadway structure?
I think there's 2 things. One, the first in Alameda, or the ASO project, I believe we were required to build that because of the basically the motor transport building. Basically, we have motor transport where that, yes, it's part of the mitigation measure, so we were required to actually build that. So that's the one.
Well, let me put it this way then. I thought there was support. I thought there was a commitment to move forward with a Broadway structure. I'll motion today that we take back $12 million of SPR funds to the CD14 account because some commitments are not being fulfilled. And then I will go back and we will determine how do we make up for the remainder of the dollars, whether it's $12 additional million for on MICLA or whatever it may be. But I just think that to come this far in the game and see two other parking structures moving forward and now being told that there's a study that we're reevaluating the parking for the whole city just does not make sense.
I don't think we were evaluating Parkville City. I think what I mentioned was that we had some city structures that we were looking at, and those city structures were evaluated to see, how the parking works in those districts. And I think that what that parking study will show is, the vacancy rates, when they're occupied. It will show in the different areas how much parking is needed in those lots.
And who in my staff did Santana talk to? My staff doesn't seem to recall any conversation about this.
We'll have to
We'll have
follow
to get
up,
back
yeah.
to you.
Okay. Well, I'm certainly not happy, and let me tell you, we are going to move forward with that Broadway parking structure, and
Well, there are ways of working with the parking structure, Councilman, and I think that one of the things we did talk to your staff about was looking at a private developer doing the parking structure. I mean, there are a lot of creative ways that I think that we
a lot
can
of
do
creative
this.
ways, but that's for the construction to be creative. The acquisition, I think it's going to take city dollars, and it's not $56 million, it's about half of that. And one way or another, I think that we need to, one, fulfill commitments that were made, and two, be consistent. And I think it speaks to Parks' comments that SPRF funds are not be used for their intended purpose. They're either loaned or taken or swept because we are not using them when they should be intended. And certainly in CD14, we were saving money to deliver a big project. And in this case, we, in good faith, helped the general fund to move forward when it needed it. And we have to figure out one way or another how we're going to move forward on that. Again, tell me what's different about the Broadway structure. Why are we moving forward with these other two and not the Broadway structure?
I think one of the things that we're going to find out in the study that's coming out shortly, we're still verifying some of the information, is that we have a parking facility very close, Pershing Square, and the utilization of that parking structure, as I say, is actually below. Basically, there's excess capacity there, and that structure is not being utilized now. So we would have some concern about building another structure where we have one where there's plenty of space now, and it's very, very close, basically in the vicinity.
Okay. Well, number one, it is currently underutilized, but we also understand that the whole purpose of revitalizing Broadway is to put back into place the over 1 million square feet of upper floors on Broadway. That's for office space and other commercial uses. We anticipate a lot more need in those areas. Additionally, we are restoring some of the historic theaters there that are currently underutilized. We could imagine a time when, in fact, we're going to use a lot more and need a lot more space in those areas. I will provide you several studies that have been made that have taken Pershing Square into account and have viewed the need for additional parking garages in the area. Those studies are recent as well. I don't know what or where you're getting your information from. Secondly, Pershing Square does not lend itself well to Broadway. It is on other corridors that could serve other needs in the area and not necessarily those on Broadway. The way the areas are shaped, the way we have our pedestrians walk, the signage, etc., that's where it's used primarily for the Julie District and other uses in that area. There are a lot of reasons why it makes sense to build a parking garage on Broadway. We have made it very clear, reports have made it very clear, and I do not know what reports you are referring to, and I think it's up to the policymaker to make those decisions and not for you to determine and look at land use and how we would like to use land use in our districts. So other than financing and you recommending financing options for us, please do not make any decisions as to the needs for parking in downtown Los Angeles. We are going to build this parking structure. Thank you.
Let me just say that I think you have anything?
Yeah, I don't object to our sweeping this money into the reserves for this year because we're obviously in an unusual circumstance. But I have a question longer term, and I'm again new, and I don't know that the council member representing my district was advocating for this previously, but we have several surprisingly economically depressed areas in the 5th Council District purely because of a lack of parking. And long-term, the question is it even a remote possibility that parking structures that are not already in the works have any chance of being built if we keep sweeping this money into the general fund? And even if we don't, is there a process by which future parking structures can get built that are not already on the drawing board?
We have placed in our recommendation that the Department of Transportation work with council offices and work with the CAO and CLA to develop a capital project policy to do somewhat of a 5-year or some kind of plan for parking projects. And the current ordinance that allows the surplus transfer to the reserve fund sunsets at the end of this fiscal year on June 30, 2010. So the council can decide whether or not to extend that sunset clause in the future. And also, for example, the 09-10 Special Parking Revenue Fund budget anticipates a $25 million surplus from meter and lot revenue generation. And while that has been programmed to go into the reserve fund, we anticipate something similar potentially in future budgets that can be decided whether or not to go to the reserve fund or remain in the special parking revenue fund for capital projects, so we can estimate approximately $25 million in a future year to be able to go to either upgrading meters or to go towards capital projects.
How do we prioritize these citywide, or if we actually had the funding, does it go to the district where the funds are raised?
The department can speak more on that.
No. That's a misnomer.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Mayor Sadati, Assistant General Manager, LA DOT. I apologize, I only heard the last part of your question, if you don't mind repeating.
The question is, in terms of trying to fund future parking structures, if and when there actually is money that's left in that fund, do we prioritize citywide, or is the funding set aside by the district where the parking meter money comes from? How do we decide that?
That's a great question, and I think historically that's not how it's been done. I think we've worked with each council member in the council office, and however each council has a working group that comes up with the potential projects, we would work with them. So as Ms. Janice mentioned, we would be part of that task force to work with your staff and the communities and the neighborhoods to understand what the parking problems are and what the solutions would be. As far as priorities, obviously, we would look at demand, supply, we would look at, other factors that are involved, and again, work with the committee as mentioned as a city to come up with that. And, this is just an idea right now. We haven't figured out what the factors will be. There's also a few other projects that has been mentioned. One is Pico Robertson and one is Wilcox Schrader. So there's 2 additional motions that have been approved for potential parking projects in those 2 communities. Pico Robertson is a senior housing, and Wilcox Schrader, I believe, is a private public partnership for potential development.
So is there actually parking in that Pico Robertson senior housing project, excess parking beyond what's there now as a surface lot?
Yes, there will be a public parking component for that project as well, to replace the existing public parking.
Now, one thing, and I think Mr. Koretz understood this question, is there a process that gets you from theory to parking lot in the city? Is there somebody that's looking at that, making a recommendation on it? How do you get from a thought to funding?
Typically, the way it's been done, Councilmember, is, within areas, it's very key to do studies. As you mentioned, you've had, real more in-depth, detailed studies where, you look at utilization, you look at turnover, you look at supply, you look at demand, the different times that the parking is needed. And that's when combination of those factors then, with the help of a real detailed study, puts in the fact of how many spaces potentially will be needed. Then you look at things like the site, as this should be above ground or underground, and all those costs come into play. And that's when really a project can be built and some potential cost estimates can be given out, and creative financing, if SPRF isn't available, then becomes a key factor in those.
Okay, it's a hard question for me because, I'm new to this part of the process. I can't tell whether this is just theoretical, but as a practical matter, it's an impossibility. And I have 3 or 4 areas that desperately need parking and parking structures. Would this ever happen, or is this just something that is a hopeless thought?
Well, I'll just give you one example. For example, Councilmember Rosendahl was able to put together a very comprehensive, he had funding, so he was able to put out an RFP for a comprehensive study that included a parking component. So, where funding is available from other sources, then we as a department can help obviously oversee and get a good consultant on board that can do the detailed study necessary. Right now, internally, we don't have the staffing, the resources to look at the entire city and be able to tell you exactly what the 5 years is going to look like, what areas are going to need parking or not. So we've worked with areas and piggybacked on other potential contracts out there to put in the parking component, to get that data that's really crucial, that's needed to make those types of decisions. So, we do have, and we have been working on a meter program for the city. We have potential projects for off-street, but we haven't had really the resources necessary to go and do the full in-depth prioritization of where is the parking needed and how it, should be built and with what funding. So I think this task force that was mentioned would be a start in getting with the different council offices and getting hopefully to a point where you guys can tell us what areas, what your constituents, what other projects you thought are helpful or needed, and then we can tell you what we can do.
I guess one thing I'd like to just maybe add on to that, I know we've traditionally looked at different, council districts and areas. I think one of the things the city really has to decide, on a go-forward basis, what it's going to do with some sort of a transit-oriented policy. Are we going to continue building parking structures, or are we going to look at other ways of moving folks around?
So in other words, what I consider a somewhat pie-in-the-sky concept until we're maybe 30 or 40 years from now, the idea that you stop providing parking and therefore people will ride transit. As a practical matter, I have several areas in my district where they're becoming more and more depressed, ironically, in the 5th Council District, where you don't think of it, because there isn't parking, so people go somewhere else. I don't think that's going to change probably in our lifetime. So I'm hoping we don't go off in a bizarre policy direction of underparking ourselves and guaranteeing economic disaster in the areas where we've done that.
Very good. Let me just ask that on this issue, so that there's 3 or 4 things I think we have to do. Number one, direct that the 2 parking structures in question, Alviso, First and Alviso, and the Vine Street, be funded by Nicola funds, one direction. That subsequent to their funding, at the appropriate time, the CAO would use the ARA bonds at debt financing. That would be the second goal. The third goal is that we move $39 million from Special Parking Revenue Fund into the Reserve Fund for this fiscal year. The fourth direction is that we ask the CAO and the CLA and the city attorney to restructure the current repayment ordinance to reflect that the loans of special parking revenue funds shall be structured to be repaid, and with clarity as to what is eligible versus what is ineligible funds that are in the special parking revenue fund, but that there is a structure to be repaid, and that repayment be over a 2-year cycle. Those are the recommendations or the directions that I would have come in. It has to be reconciled with the CLA report that lists a variety of recommendations that some of mine would be contrary to theirs. But that's something that the 4 or 5 things I wanted to accomplish in this meeting, which basically gives direction of where that money goes. We secure the reserve fund, we fund the parking structures, we then come out of it also with a criteria of what's eligible and ineligible for loan, and we have a specific requirement as to payback with those funds over a 2-year period.
I'm sorry, can I clarify the eligible and ineligible funds? Is that just for clarification purposes? I don't believe that we have any funds in this $39 million surplus that are ineligible.
The thing is that we want to set up within the Special Parking Revenue Fund what are eligible funds. My understanding is that we have some funds that are based on the bonding that we'd never take out of the fund. The other side of it is that we also have been told over time if funds were dedicated to a existing current moving project, that those funds would be ineligible.
Okay.
So those are things we want to get clarity, because by not having the clarity, we have a different proposal each year of moving funds, not moving funds. I'll give you an example. The one that was most clear to me is that we, as a council, swept some money out of the Special Parking Revenue Fund in last year's budget. And a week later, it stood up and has a project called Blossom
Plaza.
Blossom Plaza that showed up and said, where's my money? And we basically had swept it because the view was it was not moving and there was no need for the money. A week later, he has a project on City Council agenda that says, where's my money? So these are things I think we need to determine if it's existing, if it's dedicated, if it's moving, if it's funds that are in there to deal with our debt service. Those are funds that should be ineligible to move.
Okay.
Anything else would be eligible, but in being eligible, there has to be a refund or a repayment plan, not the 5% plan that was recommended in the report, but a repayment plan to where those funds are returned to that fund for the use and appropriate use by the definition of the Special Parking Revenue Fund.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that under this new ordinance that would be developed with the repayment plan within 2 years, by the end of the fiscal year 2012, if the $39 million surplus goes forward and the proposed $25 million surplus in 09-10 goes forward this fiscal year, in 2012 we would have to repay about $64 million to the Special Parking Revenue Fund.
That's why we want to make sure that when we decide to take it, we should have a plan to repay it.
Yeah, well, that's based on eligible projects, so we were surmised that that money it'd be a lot less than that.
Okay, I'm just saying, we need to make sure that when we talk about taking $39 million from the Special Parking Revenue Fund, there should be, as a plan, how do you repay it if you're going to take it? And that's what we want to make sure. Okay, all right. Any other questions?
It's like a loan to a relative and never gets paid back.
Okay, we have no other questions. We'll move that item with those amendments, and
I
we're
got a
adjourned.
poetry from my grandma.
Oh, jeez.